Hello everyone, and thank you for joining our webinar today. My name is Dina Otero, and we're joined by Bruce Temkin and Claire Sporton. Just a couple housekeeping items before we get started. We will be hosting a Q&A at the end of the presentation, so please feel free to submit your questions in the chat window on the bottom left-hand side of your screen. Additionally, the webinar will be recorded and the on-demand version will be available in the next 48 hours. So with that, let's get started. For those of you who don't know Confirm It, we enable organizations to develop and implement voice of the customer, employee engagement, and market research programs. Confirm It solutions are the most secure, reliable, and scalable in the world and provide technology and expertise that deliver high ROI to leading companies across a variety of industries. As I mentioned earlier, today we are joined by Bruce Temkin and Claire Sporton. Bruce Temkin is widely recognized as a leading expert in customer experience. He has worked with large organizations on defining and accelerating their customer experience journeys. His company, Temkin Group, is a leading research and consultancy firm focused on enterprise-wide customer experience transformation. He is also the chair and co-founder of the CXPA, a global nonprofit organization. Claire Sporton has specialized in customer feedback for over 15 years. She has run programs in the financial services sector and more recently with technology and consulting providers to improve their customer experience. Claire's focus at Confirm It is on ensuring Confirm It customers can deliver feedback to the people who can make a difference to the end customer and generate ROI. Claire was instrumental in the development of Confirm It Voices, a customer engagement model which provides an end-to-end approach to VOC. So with that, I'd like to pass it on to Bruce Temkin.
Thank you. And I'm excited to be talking to you on what I think is a really important topic, action-oriented VOC, the path to value. And before I get into the meat of my presentation, I want to share one important insight. And I know when I'm dealing with VOC people, you're thinking, all right, there's going to be some data on this chart. Well, there's no data because I think that the most important insight has nothing to do with data at all. And the insight that I want to share with you is a mantra that I use, which is that customer feedback is cheap, actionable insight can be valuable, but taking action on insight is precious. What I mean by that is that all too often we find companies that are going over backwards and spending so much time just trying to get customer feedback. And they talk about the feedback they have. Oh, we're getting it here, we're getting there, we're getting this. And yet they're not driving much change in the organization. So getting feedback, getting customer feedback in and of itself has little to no value. Now, at second level, taking action and insight can be valuable, right? Or actionable insight can be valuable. Because once we put the insight in a meaningful framework, we get it in the right form at the right time to the right people, it then has the possibility of being valuable. But once again, only is valuable if people end up taking action on it. At the end of the day, the key precious commodity here is taking action on insight. And I want you to remember that because if we keep that in mind, and I know this is probably not a surprise to anyone on this webinar, but oftentimes what I find, even though we can conceptually understand that companies often fall into the trap of not acting and behaving like that. So I want you to remember as we go through the presentation to identify wherever it is that you can act in a way that's consistent with prioritizing what you do to take action on insights. And in which case, you will be precious. And that's what we want. We want you to be precious. So let's look at some data on when we looked at large company voice of the customer programs. We asked a number of, actually it turns out a couple hundred large organizations to rate elements of their voice of the customer program. And what this shows is the percentage of respondents that rated those areas as either good or very good. Now, a few things to note from here. First of all, as I mentioned, the highest rated area by far is soliciting customer feedback. Great. Companies have figured out how to ask customers for feedback. I have to say, of all the challenges on earth, that one doesn't sound terribly insurmountable. But we do see that even with that, only 3/4 of companies think they're good or very good at that. But when it comes to everything else on that list, which are more about getting and taking action on the insights, companies are very poor. Not many companies do it well. And those last two, making changes to the business based on insights or reviewing implications that cut across organizations, companies really, really struggle with. They really struggle once you take insight out of a siloed area and try and apply it in the more profound issues across an organization, it gets more and more difficult. But having said that, that's where the big breakthroughs come from. That's where organizations are able to build up a much higher maturity in their voice of customer programs, and that maturity level allows them to drive continuous and dramatic improvement in their organization. So I talked about maturity. I'd like to introduce our 5 levels of VOC maturity. Novices, those are people who know very little about voice of customer, just starting to figure out sort of where they should listen, how they should listen. Then collectors, in that first stage, companies oftentimes get overly focused on, what are our listening posts, which listening post, what questions should we ask, and heavily focused on just that collection piece. Then we get to the analyzers. Those are companies that have put in place reasonably good listening stations and listening posts, but then are really cranking through that analysis, trying to find that insight, running reports, creating PowerPoint slides. And they have some analyzers start to have some connection with the rest of the business, but it's more like they're creating reports for other parts of the organization to consume. In collaborators, we start to see a much tighter connection between the people who are handling VOC and the operational leaders across the organization. Because in collaborators, we're starting to see customization of insights to meet the form factor, the timing factor, that will help different operational parts of the business to see information in ways that they can take action on it. And then finally, transformers, we've gotten to the high level where companies are taking pretty much all of their actions. They take everything from what we do with an individual customer at an operational level up to what we do in terms of deciding where we're going to put locations or what products we're going to roll out, and the capital investments we're going to make. All of those decisions in transformers are built off of deep customer insight. So sort of those are the ranges of maturity. Now we have a VOC maturity assessment, competency and maturity assessment, and so when we looked at this data across the same 200 companies, we find that very few have made it to those top 2 levels of maturity, the collaborators and transformers. As a matter of fact, only 20%, 1 out of 5, and these are companies that actually have formal VOC programs. So we're not even including companies on this list who do not have formal VOC programs. But there is good news in that. We are seeing an improvement, so that 20% in those top 2 buckets of maturity is actually an increase from 16% in 2012. So we're looking at data from late 2013, comparing it to late 2012. And as you can tell, just looking at the trends, we'll be looking at this again in late 2014. But good news is, while few organizations have reached high levels of VOC maturity, it is getting better. Now, if companies want to continue to get mature and they want to live up to that mantra I talked about, then they really have to find a way to build in more action orientation in their VOC. So what I want to do now is talk about 6 keys to more action-oriented VOC, 6 ways that your VOC programs can be more action-oriented. Okay? So let's go with number 1. The first one is to collect to improve, not to track. I often find that companies, they want to track everything, right? How are we doing in this sub-area of our website with every interaction. How are we doing in our, the sub-item in a room? Not only for a hotel, not only we want to know how you enjoyed the stay, we want to know how you enjoyed your room, we want to know how you enjoyed the bed, we want to know how you enjoyed the TV, we want to know how you enjoyed room service, we want to know how you enjoyed the food of room service versus the service of room service, on and on and on. And so we end up with these really, really bloated surveys because we're trying to track everything. And we're not taking action on it because lots of these metrics don't move a lot. We're just getting them there. And it turns out that if we allow that to continue, then we have these really long surveys that customers don't want to fill out. So we're actually hurting our ability to get insights that can drive action by focusing and maintaining our energies around having questions that just track things and bloat it. Now, part of the problem is, I like to say, that people don't like dropping questions. You can have, you go to a large organization, everyone is a potential creator of a survey question. Everyone thinks that they can ask a question that's good to put on a survey, but hardly anyone, if anyone at all, is there to cut them out. So it really does require a very heavy focus on removing survey questions. And the way I do that, I oftentimes do that, is by first ensuring that everyone understands that measuring how we're doing is not the goal, right? And I often say I'd rather, if the choice is between getting some questions that we're asking customers that will drive us to make improvements versus asking more questions that are just around having us be able to track how we're done, I'll always, always, always opt for getting information that's going to help us make improvements. And we have to get that point across. And the way we do that is by prioritizing the questions that will drive action. And one of the things you can do that I've done with organizations is, if you have a lot of questions, we're going to say we're going to get rid of them all, right? Because it's really hard to remove bloat from the beginning. We're going to remove them all, and the only questions that we're going to start with are those that someone can make a case that they've actually made a significant improvement in the company over the last year using that data. So we'll start with that and really just add on the things that we're going to drive action, because we really want to make sure that we're collecting information to make improvements, not just to track how we're doing. All right, so that's the first key to action orientation. The second is to really think about distributing more than you analyze. I know in companies, especially when we get to VOC people and analysts and people who work in customer insights, there is a bias towards hoarding information. We want to hold on to it. We want to analyze it. We don't want to let it out until we get some deep, meaningful insight. Now, the problem with that is that it takes analysts oftentimes a lot of data to see deep, meaningful insights, whereas people working in the business can see it in small, little data sets. The simplest area is to think about a contact center, right? If I'm an analyst who's looking at data on feedback in a contact center, I might have to wait weeks, months, or years to get enough data to say that we have a problem with one agent. But if I'm managing a contact center or a supervisor of a group of call center agents, and I know that I'm having a problem with one agent, well, one bad piece of feedback about that agent, while not statistically meaningful, will be very meaningful for me as either an opportunity to coach that rep or as an opportunity to look into other areas of training or activities I can take to make improvements. I don't need to wait for a VOC analyst to have enough data to say with reasonable certainty that agent has a problem. I can use that data because I have context. And that's why we talk about contextual insights, right? That if I understand my business and I have business context, then if you put timely, relevant data in front of me, then I can draw observations from the data that resonate with my understanding of the business and take action on it. So distribute more than you analyze. And I think I've talked over the past with Claire. Claire does some great work, so I'm going to catch her off guard maybe and ask her. I know you have some passion around this, Claire. Do you have any thoughts that you want to add about distributing more than you analyze?
You're absolutely right, Bruce. This piece around it being timely is absolutely key because, thinking about that call center example that you gave, we're looking to drive behavior change. The people that are going to drive that behavior change need relevant, timely data on their actions that they can remember. There's no point providing somebody with feedback on their behavior from 3 months ago. They need the feedback on what they did yesterday. And by providing that, as you say, rather than doing all of the analysis at centre, let's put this data into the hands of the people that can drive the change for us. Let's not hoard. Let's get it out there, and let's get people taking responsibility and accountability for driving that change in their part of the business, or even if it's down to the individual and their individual behaviour. Absolutely key. And I love the point that you make around business context as well. Customer feedback is incredibly powerful. So if we bring it alongside operational or financial data and make it come alive from that perspective as well, I think that then it really does start to resonate for people, and they can see the action that they can take to change the situation.
Cool. So it looks like Claire and I are aligned. No data hoarding. You heard it from both of us.
Good point.
So the third key I want to talk about is that I don't want you to fall into the 360-degree view trap. What do I mean by that? I hear it all the time. People talk in the industry. We need a 360-degree view of our customers. We need to have a 360-degree view. And so, my initial response to that is that, measuring everything is a great thing, conceptually, unless you live in the real world. And in the real world, we have constraints, right? Such as there's costs, customer attention, VOC team bandwidth. And the reality is that if you go down the path where you're trying to understand all of what's going on with your customer all over the place, then you'll fall victim to this trap because you'll never be able to live up to it. You're always trying to get more and more of a view. And once again, that is behavior that's inconsistent with that golden rule that taking action on insights is precious. So my advice here is when you're constrained, be strategic about your focus. As a matter of fact, if a 360-degree view may be idealistically wonderful, but a 90-degree view that you're taking action on, if it's the right 90-degree that you're prepared to take action on, is going to be 1,000 times more impactful to your business than trying to continue to reach that golden nugget of having a view across everything that your customer does all the time. So you really want to look for feedback in areas where you're prepared or able to make changes. So, for instance, one of the things that companies do, which are wonderful, are things like transactional or interaction types of feedback. Ask customers what they think after an interaction, and you can look at that across all sets of interactions. But I have companies I work with that what we've done is said, all right, that's great. It costs money and energy, and it does require that you actually use up some bandwidth of your customers, and you can only survey customers a certain amount of times. And so rather than necessarily trying to get feedback after every interaction, let's determine quarterly a set of focus areas where we're prepared to make improvements, and let's get feedback, deep feedback in those areas, not worry about the rest so much, and then quarterly determine our priorities and focus the feedback that we get to fuel the changes that we want to make in those areas. So you see that it's completely different than just trying to collect everything. We're trying to focus our energy on the places where we're prepared to make a change. So number 3, don't fall into the 360-degree view trap. The fourth key is to examine the journeys, not interactions. Your customers when they interact with you, they're on some journey. They're on some type of journey because in general, they didn't wake up in the morning or wake up last week or wake up 3 months ago and say that my number one objective in the world is to interact with your company. In almost all cases, they're interacting with your company because they have to, and they have to do it to achieve some other part of a goal that they're on. So that the more you can understand the journey, the more effective you can be at understanding the information that they're telling you, and therefore the more likely you're going to be able to make improvements that'll drive significant differences in how they perceive you if you help them along their journey. And so that's why lots of companies do things like create journey maps. Now this is an example of a journey map. Lots of companies have different types of journey maps, but the idea that if we want to collect insights from customers, we ought to do it in the context of understanding what journey they're on and how they're giving us feedback within the number of interactions, where those interactions can sometimes span different times, they span different channels, they can actually include interactions that have nothing to do with us. So we have to really recognize that customers are on a journey and collect feedback. And you know what? If we do that, if we understand that there's a journey, then we can track how different customers are doing along their different journeys. So a piece of feedback, in a contact center, are you satisfied with a call in a contact center may have completely different meaning to a customer who is a really important customer who is trying to book a trip for his family that is a once-in-a-lifetime trip, than it may be for an unimportant customer who is just, calling up because they want to service a particular issue for a once-a-year flight that they're taking, right? So if we understand the journey, then we can make improvements in that context. And as you do this, I know I showed a journey map. One of the things I want you to keep in mind is that you don't have to be able to satisfy your journey just with journey maps. One of the things I'll encourage you to do is anytime you're looking at a customer interaction, always ask, who is that customer? What did they do right before that interaction? And what are they going to do right after that interaction? If you do that, then you can apply a lot of the thinking around journeys to the data that you collect and to the analysis and recommendations you make to the business at how they can make improvements with that information. Now, the fifth key to action-oriented VOC is to break dependency on multiple choice surveys. I know it. We have lots of multiple choice surveys, and a lot of that grows out of historically our ability to analyze data was really focused on hard data like survey questions. So if we ask someone, are you satisfied, 1 to 7? Are you likely to recommend, 0 to 10? Is this a struggle? How much of a struggle is this, 1 to 5? Whatever multiple choice questions we've asked, we find that lots of companies have been using them because they are easy to analyze. And what you see here on this slide is we looked at data from companies who have more mature VOC programs and those that have less mature VOC programs. A few interesting things to note that they pretty much all of them do periodic relationship surveys at the same rate. More mature VOC programs have more surveys after interactions. Tends to be that those types of post-interaction surveys are helpful in really driving ongoing improvements. But if you look at the bottom of the page, I think that's more interesting, that the more mature VOC programs have significantly more focus on using customer transaction history, call center agent notes, inbound customer emails. They're using unstructured data. And so it's really, really important if you're going to be a more mature VOC program and you're going to drive more action from the VOC efforts, that you start to really look less at those multiple choice surveys and look more at other forms of insight that customers have that are rich, and many of them are unstructured data sets. Now, if we look at another comparison of mature VOC programs with less mature VOC programs, and this is where we ask the question about what are the obstacles that they face. So these are the answer to the question, what are the most significant obstacles that you run into when you're trying to build out your VOC program? And I'll point out several things here, a few things here. First is that the only place where more mature VOC programs run into more of an issue than less mature VOC programs are in integrating with internal systems. So does that mean, that just more mature VOC programs, stink at integration, but those that are less mature are better? No. What this means is that more mature VOC programs recognize that the value they're going to get is driven by integrating operational CRM data in with the data they're collecting. So it's not that they're less good at doing this than less mature companies. It's just that they're doing more of it, and they're seeing it being more strategic. And as they're doing more of it and driving more integration, it becomes a bigger issue to them. Because if you look across all the other issues, they're finding those be less important. So integration becomes much, much more critical as you become more mature, and it becomes more of an issue because you're trying to do more of it, and it's difficult to do, but you have to overcome it to drive the types of really heavy action orientation that we're talking about. Then you can see that there are big gaps, in the other ones, and for less mature VOC programs, the number one obstacle they run into is taking action based on insights, consistent with what we've been talking about all along, that more mature VOC programs integrate more data, have less dependence on multiple choice surveys, and do a better job of driving action with their VOC programs. So that's the fifth one. And as companies do this, as they end up putting more and more information together, we see more advanced analytics, right? As you put customer feedback with customer history and real-time interaction, CRM, we see more and more growth of predictive analytics. We see more mature VOC programs embarking much more on predictive analytics, which I think ultimately will end up with prescriptive analytics. Now we're going a little bit into the future, right? That once you can predict sort of how customers will react, then you can prescribe actions that customers should take to be able to drive more satisfaction, to be able to drive more loyalty. So I think that this is all, the breaking dependency on multiple choice surveys and getting more of the data and integration is really not only about what we do today, but preparing us for the future where we're going to be doing much more advanced analytics with that combined data. Now, the sixth area of driving action-oriented VOC is really to embrace the enormous value of employees. We've been talking a lot about customer data and customer feedback and customer insights and all of that, but the reality is that there are a bunch of employees at the front line, and they have lots of insights not only about what they see customers doing, but what they see about the processes and technologies and techniques that they use internally. And so we need to do things like develop a voice of employee program. How do we make sure that we're collecting in an ongoing way employee feedback, employee voice about what's going on? We need to cultivate CX ambassadors across the organization, have employees across the organization not only using our VOC data to make improvements, but giving us feedback on what they're hearing, and so we can update our VOC efforts, and so we can have this closed loop not just with customers but with employees, and gain insights across customers and spot trends. And all of this, not only is this about VOC, because it's a wonderful way for us to make sure we're really hearing all the things we need to hear and having context around all the things that we're doing in a VOC program, but this type of effort with embracing employees also raises employee engagement and has value on its own. So as you make the path to action-oriented VOC, the 6 keys that I went over today are collect to improve, not to track, distribute more than you analyze, don't fall into the 360-degree view trap, examine journeys, not interactions, break dependency on multiple choice surveys, and embrace the enormous values of employees. Now, if you do that, if you do those 6 things, then you will live up to the most important insight that customer feedback is cheap, actionable insight can be valuable, but taking action on insight is precious. And with that, let me turn it over to Claire.
And thank you, Bruce. And it's always awful actually having to go second, and I'm nodding furiously at this end of the telephone line, going, yes, you're absolutely right, Bruce. And hopefully you'll find in my presentation that I'm reiterating some of the points that Bruce has made, because I think you're bang on the money, bang on the money. And when we talk about action, I kind of pulled out this photograph. I love this image of Usain Bolt. To talk about action, he really is poetry in motion. Of course you can see the power and the speed coming through. His arms and legs are a blur of motion. But what I think is fascinating about this photograph is his head is perfectly still. I don't know if it's coming across over the webinar, but you can actually see the focus in his eyes, an absolute understanding of what he's got to do, and a focus on his end goal, that finishing line. And that's really what I wanted to highlight today, is how to achieve that absolute and unswerving focus, because this is what's going to truly drive action and drive success through our organizations. It's interesting, we were talking, Bruce, you were talking before about, the importance of analysis, but then the worry about analysis paralysis. In the past, VOC was all about research and the data and the analysis. But over the last, 5 years or so, maybe, I've seen a real wind change. VOC is always going to continue to be embedded in robust data, but also it's going to be about something else. It's about, in the future, much more around a focus on the customer, but critically on action. Driving action across our organizations and building engagement not only of our customers, but as you said, Bruce, also about our teams, both the exec and front line. And I think that's really particularly important at the moment. This slide is called, a perfect storm, and poor old Ajax Industries in the image, they really are feeling the pressure at the moment. And it's the same for many, many organizations across all sorts of sectors. This pressure of commoditization and new entrants coming in, together with the channel complexity that we're now seeing, and critically, this piece around expectations. The expectation of our customer or client base is growing. Their requirements are growing, and our role is to respond to them. So, unfortunately, research isn't good enough. We need to be using customer insights to help our organizations respond to all those competing priorities and build a successful and more importantly, a sustainable business into the future. And that's how we can use our Voice of the Customer program to drive action in that area. So yes, I do really feel that we are in a perfect storm. If organizations ever needed to drive demonstrable change with their programs, now really is the time. So are we doing it? Are we driving the change that we need? And I wanted to kind of really highlight, I've brought up again Bruce's slide, because I just couldn't believe those numbers. Less than half of organizations who not only have a VOC program up and running, but were engaged enough to respond to Bruce's survey, and we still couldn't get up to half that number driving action from their data. That's a great opportunity for us, a great opportunity, because I think many VOC programs are driving a great deal of change within their organizations, But it's great to see that the customer experience professionals out there are recognizing that they need to do more in this area and really drive action. So, how can we do it? How can we help our organizations drive action from the feedback that they're receiving? And I wanted to talk about three key themes. One, around how are we going to get our message across? How are we going to engage across the organization? Then, once we've got people engaged, how can we empower our people to do the right thing? And finally, let's make sure that we recognize what we have achieved and measure and celebrate that success. So let's look at the first of those around engaging the business. Now, there's lots of people across an organization that we need to engage with. And I think one of the first steps I would take with a VOC program is really to identify who those individuals are. Who are the individuals across your organization that you are going to be looking to drive that action? Map them. Assess their level of engagement with your program. And from this mapping, you can then identify your early adopters and your potential problem groups. And as Bruce mentioned earlier, 360 view is absolutely fantastic. But if you can identify a particular area of the business where you've got that level of engagement and appetite to drive change, let's start there. Let's start with our early adopters and demonstrate and prove the business case and how this can really drive success. Then it's going to be a much simpler job for you to drive that out across the organization. So, for the purpose of time and simplicity, I'm really going to talk about two particular groups. I'm going to be talking about the deciders and the doers. Of course, the deciders, most programs that I see that are truly struggling are because of a lack of exec engagement. So I really want to focus on this group. And when I look at groups of execs, they really fall into two groups. Those that just get it and those who unfortunately don't. Now, with the first group, the ones that just get it, we don't really need to talk about too much. I remember actually I was doing some research and I asked a CEO about how they quantified the return on investment of their program. And he just looked at me very puzzled and said, well, why on earth would I need to do that? So let's focus on the second group of our deciders, those organizations where we've got a situation like this. Now, as a customer experience professional, how many of us have faced this kind of situation? I don't want to be too melodramatic, but without engagement at this level, a program is really going to struggle. If we want to drive action, we need to drive engagement with our execs. So how can we bring them on board? And I think the key tip that I would raise here is speak their language. When you're looking to build executive buy-in, it's critical that we talk their language and we understand the business challenges that they're looking to address. So of all of those different issues that an exec could be particularly interested in, let's consider an organization where the critical issues are reducing churn and maybe compliance and regulation being the second. One example, linking feedback to value to contracts in a B2B setting. So this piece around reducing churn. One organization that we're working with, I won't name them for obvious reasons, by linking that financial data in and being able to say, okay, they were using the NPS metric, not only could they identify their detractors, but they could also identify that those detractors represented nearly $500 million worth of contracts that were due for renewal that year, really focused their minds. They had a negative NPS metric, and everybody nodded their head with horror and said, yes, we need to do something. When you put that figure up and say that that represents X amount in financial value, that's what really drives action within your organization. And particularly for those of you who are in an industry where we have a regulatory body, that all fades into insignificance if we're actually looking at a compliance issue, and driving issues with regard to compliance is a great way to get the exec engaged in the program and help them understand how their support will help them drive improvement in that area of the business. So once we're able to start talking their language, particularly with the exec, it's a great idea to, as I said there, show them the money. We can put some figures to the impact the program can have on the bottom line for their business is really going to whet their appetite. I think two things to note from these figures. Obviously they've talked here, Forrester have been talking around revenue, additional purchase, reduction of churn, and the word of mouth piece. But also the other area where we can support revenue is around the cost to serve. And obviously happier customers don't call in so often, don't have issues that need to be resolved, and therefore when you're looking at the financial model, the importance of cost to serve is key. I think also, in my opinion, that word of mouth figure is very underplayed. But that's quite often very difficult to quantify, so it's potentially right to underplay it compared to the additional purchase and reduced churn that you can factually demonstrate for your exec. So showing them the money is important, but I think also what's really important is keeping it real. Metrics and numbers are always going to be important, but the key to engagement is bringing it back to the human level. Now, we all use text analytics, and text analytics are incredibly powerful, enabling us to give order to that mass of unstructured data that Bruce was talking about earlier. But what we need to make sure is that we don't lose the voice of the customer. I was talking to a large insurance company who were looking to improve their reporting, and that there was a lot of talk about the validity of the data and the presentation of the numbers. And then one of my colleagues brought up the live verbatims from their dashboard, and we saw this comment from a woman called Julia. The room went quiet, their jaws dropped, particularly when they saw that she'd made this comment nearly a month ago and no one had called her back. We stopped talking about validity of data, and we started talking about what action was not being taken. It was a real wake-up call, and it's a great way of getting your exec to, yes, keep a focus on the numbers, but also to recognize that these are real people, and we learn what they think and they feel through their comments and the statements that they make. So let's make sure that we make that type of information available to our exec. So if that's our deciders, what about our doers, our front line that we were talking about, that Bruce was talking about earlier? Let's think about them. Now, my goodness, if we thought it was hard with the exec, front-line engagement is even harder. How many times have we heard the comments, oh, we tried this in 2004, oh, it didn't work then either. We're very special, you know, our department's different. It won't work here. Now, these are the messages that we're always hearing, and it's really difficult to drive that level of front-line engagement. You know, I nearly didn't include this slide because I think it is so cheesy, but the message is right. And interestingly, it's a very old proverb that the Chinese claim it as theirs, and the Native Americans claim it as a Native American proverb. And I'm sure there are many other cultures. I suppose with that level of endorsement, it must be true. So let's not talk about telling them about what to do. Let's talk about the doing. And that really brings me to my second point around empowering employees. And this is what's absolutely key, not talking to them, but driving the engagement through empowerment. And this is really key because obviously engaged teams, they are the individuals that can drive a great customer experience. And of course that greater customer experience, as we all know, is going to drive business success. So there's some figures actually here from Temkin Group, from Bruce, around customer experience leaders and customer experience laggards. If we split organisations into those two groups, the leaders with above average satisfaction and the laggards with below average satisfaction, we can see a huge difference in the commitment of these frontline doers in driving success. And as Bruce was saying earlier, the people that are going to drive that engagement, the people that are going to drive that success are our front line. And if we can say that, 61% of our employees are not committed to helping the company succeed, that's an issue that we really need to focus on front on. So, when we're looking at our front line and our middle managers, how do we drive engagement within that particular group? And there's three key areas for me. It's around organising for success, empowering people to drive change, and then also giving our internal employees a voice as well in the process. So when we think about organising for success, the top of that diagram, of course we need our steering group, of course we need our core programme team and our executive sponsor, but critically we need to bring into the fold each of the different functional areas of our organisation and identify and engage with customer experience champions. These individuals have a twofold role. Firstly, they can act as the catalysts for change in their part of the business. But also, as we were hearing earlier, they can provide the insights into the issues that you only get from daily contact with customers. The second piece is around customer journey mapping. So again, repeating what Bruce was talking about, using the customer experience and the customer journey map to really drive an understanding of the experience. So we can bring people together from different functions, yes, absolutely, to map the customer journey itself, identify the moments of truth, and also have an internal perspective on how we're doing. But I think it's the bottom half of this slide that really interests me, is around when we're thinking about being action-orientated, which parts of our organisation have accountability for which parts of the customer journey. If we're looking to drive some improvement in the support area, who is it that we should be focusing on who's going to be driving that change internally? That ownership map provides us with a great tool with which we can use to drive change going forward with our programs. The customer journey mapping, a great way of bringing people together to define the experience for our customers, but also to empower them and give them ownership of the different parts of the experience to drive change and action going forward. The final piece is around giving them a voice. And again, I'm reiterating some of the messages that Bruce was giving. The people across our organisations understand what the issues are. Give them the opportunity to give you feedback on that process. Even if it's just a site on the intranet where they can capture their ideas and thoughts. We see many organisations now using apps on their smartphones where not only can they give offline comments, but they can also potentially take photographs or even videos of what issues are, which are incredibly powerful when we can repeat them back into the exec and drive change off the back of it. One word of warning, though, in this area. I remember talking to a large bank who'd put in place a Voice of the Employee program, and they said it was like exploding a bomb within their organisation, because they simply were not ready for the explosion of feedback that they were going to get from their employees. We need to deal with this feedback in exactly the same way as we would with feedback from our customers. We need to have the opportunity to analyse it and feed back to our internal employees what we've heard and what action we're going to take, rather than just take that data in and analyse it to death. And that really brings me on to my final theme very quickly, which is around measuring and celebrating success. And quite often people say, yeah, well, that's obvious, isn't it, Claire? Of course we do. But it is often missed, and we often forget to identify success and really laud it within our organisations. So there's kind of three key pieces that we can do around celebrating success. Obviously, we've got the piece around hitting targets and how that makes us all feel. The successful improvement initiatives and making sure people understand the great things that are happening across our organisation. And finally, the piece around recognition, both customer and peer. Now, just a quick message, though, around hitting targets. Quite often I hear that people want to set targets, and the best way to celebrate success, Claire, is to make sure that people's bonuses are linked to it. Then everybody's going to celebrate that success and drive the change. Well, just a few little warnings on that. Firstly, don't start trying to link people's bonuses to a target until you've got well-established, simple metrics. A telco client of mine was talking to me and was telling me a real horror story where they were saying that they had tried to compensate their outsourced telemarketing teams on customer feedback. Unfortunately, the telemarketing teams didn't believe the results. So what they decided to do was to send out to the same customers their own survey to double-check the results. Second warning, make sure that you've got a robust baseline before you start setting targets around it. I had a call literally just the other day, and it was a bank and saying, great, we're thinking of moving over to NPS. Really simple question for you. What should our target NPS be for next year? No baseline, no historical trend to extrapolate from, nothing. Now, I could have given a very simple answer, but really, do we want to base people's targets and their compensation on a finger in the air? We really need to make sure that we have robust baseline and good quality data before we impact people in that way. Also, people need to have control. That telco company that I was talking about earlier, with regard to their telemarketing teams, they were being compensated based on the overall Net Promoter Score, which was not something that they were in full control of. And that links me to the final point about behaviour. Be aware that quarterly targets can be removed from the behaviour that drove that score. If we really want to drive true changes in behaviour, the individual needs to be able to link their behaviour with the results that they've achieved. So we need to make sure that we're providing that data in a timely fashion. So, successful improvement initiatives. Absolutely. Let's sing it from the rooftops. Let's make sure that we really put up in lights the teams within our organisations that are doing some great jobs. I love this example from the Aviva Customer Club Cup. And you can see from the photographs how really, truly engaged everybody in the team were in driving a great experience for their customers. But another example that I think beats even that Aviva example is ADT, where they get customers to recognise, to come in and provide bunches of flowers and awards to their teams. This is called the Lifesaver Award. And what I think was really nice around the ADT Awards is that the award doesn't just go to the frontline employee that talks to the customer on an individual basis. They recognise the whole of the team that is supporting that person at the front line to deliver a great job to the individual customer. You see lots of tears, you see lots of joy in the faces of the employees, and you can see how really important it is to get that customer and peer recognition. So I hope I've covered those three key areas very quickly for you. If we're looking to drive action in our organisations, there's a lot to do, but focus really on those three key areas. Firstly, make sure that your business is engaged. If you don't have people engaged both at the decision maker level and the front line, it's going to be very difficult to drive the change forward. Once you've got them engaged, empower them. Make sure that you're getting that information out into the hands of the people that can make a difference with it. And finally, please, don't forget, please celebrate the successes. These programs are very hard to implement, and we all on this call recognize the effort that needs to go into them, and we need to make sure that we celebrate our successes. Thank you very much. That's the end of my presentation. Dina, should I pass back to you for a Q&A?
Yes, thank you so much, Claire and Bruce. That was extremely insightful, and it was very engaging because we have a ton of questions coming in. We are getting close to the top of the hour, so we'll try to answer as many questions as we can. Bruce, I'll start with you. During your presentation, you mentioned cultivating a customer experience ambassador. Can you talk a little bit more about what you mean by a customer experience ambassador?
Yes. So when you're trying to drive change in an organization, it's really hard to get different groups across the organization on the same page. And while the centralized VOC group might be creating great insights, it's really hard to get those different groups to actually use them and use those insights and drive change. So the ambassadors, the notion of ambassadors is, if you can think about creating an army of change agents across the organization, they're not part of the VOC or the CX organization. They live in their existing organization, but they become part of almost a club. You pull them, they get selected by their leadership in their different groups. They get trained on what it takes to be an ambassador, and oftentimes the ambassadors have three roles. One is to take the insights, the VOC insights, and share them in their organization and help their organization digest and use those insights. Another thing that they do is they provide feedback back to the centralized team about what's working, what's not working, and what can be improved on the overall CX program that includes voice of the customer. And then the third thing they are is, they're a sort of an advocate for change across the organization. They become almost, really visible, active endorsers of change. So oftentimes people are picked who have influence across the organization, and then we do a lot of work with companies on these ambassador programs, and you want to think about having classes of ambassadors. So maybe they serve 18 months to 24 months, and you bring another group on. So you're not only doing the things around customer experience to help change the organization, you're seeding change agents across the entire organization.
Great, thank you. Claire, this one is for you. Our program reports into the CMO. Where should accountability for a VOC program sit within the executive team to most effectively drive action?
Oh, that's a great question. Isn't it amazing, actually, how we see customer experience or VOC programs reporting into all aspects of the exec? I suppose the trite, simple answer would be, you want to be reporting directly into the CEO. And yes, you need the CEO to be engaged, but should the program be reporting in there? I think the person who asked the question was saying that they reported into the CMO, and we see a lot of programs reporting into marketing. And that's great, and that can drive change. But I think that the more effective programs that I see are actually going into the operations area, because those are the individuals who are driving the change in process and internal programs. So coming into operations or even sales, I've also seen as really effective. But critically, I think, as we were talking about before, these programs need to break down the silos. They need to engage all aspects of the organization. So whichever function we report into, our role as customer experience professionals is really to drive and influence each of the execs on our board to support the program and act real as advocates for our program in their particular areas.
Excellent, thank you. So we are getting close to the top of the hour, and we need to be sensitive with everyone's time. We do appreciate everyone who submitted their questions, and we will follow up with you separately. Thank you all for attending today, and Bruce and Claire, thank you so much for your time. I think this is an excellent webinar, very insightful information.
Great. Thanks very much, everybody.
Great. Thank you, everyone.